Hi everyone, we are live. My name is Candace Malcolm with True North, and I wanted to come live today because I want to talk about a whole bunch of stories that are in the news right now. It was an unbelievable news week just in terms of how many new cases and stories we heard about relating to an alleged terrorist or a confirmed terrorist or a terrorist who carried out an attack that had some kind of a tie or some kind of a nexus to Canada. So I'm going to count down the 5 stories of the week that involved an alleged terrorist and had a connection to Canada. Before I get into that, though, I want to do some housekeeping issues here. I want to tell you guys a bit about some updates that we've had at True North that I'm excited to announce and excited to talk about. So I'll do that first, get that out of the way, and then we will jump into these crazy news stories that have been blowing up all week. So for True North, we basically had a bunch of changes went down over the new year, and we're transitioning. So we brought on a bunch of new staff, new fellows. We've got some new writers. Really excited about Anthony Fury, who's a columnist at the Toronto Sun and the host of the national radio podcast, or Sirius XM show. Sorry, he's joined True North. We've also got Graham Gordon, who's an investigative journalist in Toronto, and he is now with True North. He's putting out a weekly podcast and a report called the True North Field Report. So he's doing investigative reporting in Toronto, in and around that area, looking into issues of border security. Right now, he's working on a series of reports about migrants and asylum seekers and refugees staying in Toronto, staying in homeless shelters and hotels and all that kind of stuff. He's got a report out from last week, another one coming out later today. So definitely check that out. We've got a new website, so you can find our stuff now at tnc.news. That's tnc.news. That's our new website, new news site. No longer using truenorthinitiative.com. You can now find our stuff at truenorthcanada.com or tnc.news. So that's really exciting. And we've got some interviews. Andrew Lawton, True North fellow, has sat down and done a couple of interviews that we're going to be rolling out over the next couple of days. He sat down and chatted with Lindsay Shepherd, who is the brave TA, former teaching assistant from Wilfrid Laurier University, who went through that crazy ordeal with her Marxist professors over, she was basically punished and censored over showing a clip of Jordan Peterson to her students. And according to the Marxists at the University of Wilfrid Laurier, that was unacceptable. So anyway, he sat down with her. Lindsay's also doing some work with True North, and she submitted a couple of columns that are up on our website, so you're going to want to check those out. Okay, I think that's all for housekeeping. Thanks so much for joining the podcast, or joining the video, I should say. Let me know where you're watching from. Let me know where you are right now, what you're up to this Friday. I guess it's Friday evening, Friday afternoon, depending on where in Canada or where in the world you are. For me, personally, personal news, today's my 5th year wedding anniversary. So my husband and I got married 5 years ago today. I'm excited. We're going out for dinner later tonight. But before that, I wanted to jump on and do this podcast. So without further delay, let's get to it. There are 5 stories this week that featured a terrorist or alleged terrorist or a condemned terrorist, a convicted terrorist that had some kind of a nexus or some kind of a connection to Canada. These stories drive me crazy when I see them in the news. So many of the times you just don't even understand how the person is Canadian. How did they become a Canadian citizen? When did they live in Canada? Why were they ever admitted in the first place? And a couple of these stories are like that. They're real head scratchers. So let's get to it. The first story, this one came out earlier this week. It is a story of an individual who was captured by Canadian allies in Syria. So for folks who have been following this story and paying attention, there are a bunch of Canadians who went to fight for ISIS. A lot of them were killed there. Some of them managed to come back to Canada. There's about 60 known terrorists that are back in Canada that have managed to slip through that the Canadian officials know about, and they're monitoring and tracking, but for some reason they're not arrested. Well, there's still some ISIS fighters that are over there continuing to fight for ISIS, even though ISIS has mostly been completely destroyed in Syria and Iraq. But here's one individual. He's a Saudi Arabian-born Ethiopian citizen, if you get that. So he was born in Saudi Arabia, even though he's of Ethiopian heritage and background, and then somehow he's also Canadian. And so here he is, Mohammed Abdullah Mohammed, and he was captured by Canadian allies, US-led allies in Syria. He's being held, and he's a Canadian citizen. So he was captured, he's being held. There's now about 15 of these individuals who are being held in basically a prison cell being maintained by our allied Syrian forces and the Syrian Democratic Forces. And they basically call him an ISIS member of Ethiopian origin who holds Canadian citizenship. That same group that's holding him has alleged that this guy was a commander. So he's not just sort of like a run-of-the-mill fighter. He was actually a guy in a position of leadership. And there's a report from Global News that alleges that this individual might have been a spokesperson for ISIS, might have been a narrator in one of those ISIS propaganda videos. And so this is pretty serious. These are the people who the United Nations is urging Canada to bring back to Canada. There's a whole legal dispute. Canada doesn't want to bring these people back because everyone knows our court system and our system for dealing with terrorists is a total joke. And the likely chance that we would be able to actually have evidence against this person that would hold up in court and that we would be able to keep him in prison, imprison him, are not likely or not 100% sure. So because of that, Canada's kind of not wanting to bring these guys back home. But here we have a Canadian. Apparently he lived in Toronto for some time. He attended Seneca College, apparently, according to Global News, and he is now being held in prison. It's interesting, he did this video. Let me see if I can open it here. Here he is. I'm going to show this quick video of this guy.
اسمك؟
اسمي محمد عبد الله محمد. أنا أصلا من أثيوبيا، جيت من كندا. دخلت من إدلب. مسكني مجلس دير الزور العسكري اللواء حمزة.
الشهيد أبو حمزة.
اللواء الشهيد أبو حمزة.
تمام.
All right, that's enough of that, guys. So, anyway, this guy's being held, and we don't really know what's going to happen with him. So that's the first story. Let's move on because we got a lot to get to. The second story, this one we reported on True North. I don't know if anyone else reported on it, but there is a convicted terrorist who is sitting in a U.S. prison who was found guilty of terrorism by the U.S., and he's a dual Pakistani-Canadian citizen. The reason he is in the news is because he's set to be released from the U.S. in 2021, and because of a new law in Canada, he's going to be extradited back to Canada after he's released. So just a bit of background on this guy. His name is Turar Hussein Rana. He's a convicted terrorist, and he is a Pakistani who also has Canadian citizenship. So this guy was convicted of conspiring to kill and behead a Danish journalist, the Danish journalist who created the cartoons that depicted the Muslim prophet Muhammad and caused a huge stir around the world, across the Islamic world mostly. So this guy was part of a plot, and he wanted to kill that Danish journalist. He was arrested and charged in 2009, and he remains in a U.S. prison. Okay, so because he's a dual citizen, he's Pakistani, but he's also Canadian, the Canadian government took steps towards revoking his Canadian citizenship. Remember, there used to be a law on the books in Canada that would revoke citizenship from convicted terrorists who had dual citizenship. It became an election issue in 2015 because the Conservatives and former Prime Minister Stephen Harper believed in revoking citizenship for terrorists. Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party of Canada were opposed to doing that, and so that was the whole issue. So remember, there was audio recording of Justin Trudeau saying that he believed that terrorists should get to keep their Canadian citizenship, and they had that whole mantra saying a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, and you can't revoke citizenship even from a dual citizen who engaged in terrorism. Basically, like the worst kind of treasonous traitors. Trudeau wanted to protect their citizenship. So this guy was one of the people who was caught up in that policy because he was in the process of having his citizenship revoked. Had he had his citizenship revoked, then when he got out of prison in the United States, he wouldn't be Canada's problem at all. He wouldn't have anything to do with Canada. It'd be Pakistan's problem, and they would have to take him back. But because Trudeau changed the law and reinstated citizenship for terrorists, this is one of the guys who, because of that law, because of that change, when he walks free, which will be in probably less than 2 years, he is going to be coming to Canada. So thanks a lot for that, Justin Trudeau. All right, story number 3. This one you might have heard of before, a Canadian Tire terrorist attack, ISIS terrorist attack. She was charged and sentenced. Well, she was convicted this week. She was in court on Wednesday and Thursday and was found to be guilty of terrorism charges. Her name is Rehab Dugmanche. She's 34. So for folks who don't remember this case, basically this strange woman was wearing an ISIS mask. She took like a bandana that was black and white bandana, wrapped it around her head, had the big ISIS logo on her forehead, went into a Canadian Tire store in Scarborough, Ontario, which is just in Toronto, and basically grabbed a golf club and started swinging it and attacking Canadian Tire employees, screaming "Allah Akbar" and saying this is for ISIS. They grabbed the golf club and tried to subdue her. She then pulled out a knife and tried to stab people. They grabbed the other arm with the knife. She started biting them, and eventually they just subdued her and held her down. And so, she was basically an unrepented ISIS terrorist. In court, she maintained that she did it for ISIS and that she was part of ISIS. And she was convicted in a court this week of those charges. But I think the most interesting part of this story is something that was revealed from the court documents that hadn't previously been released. I'm surprised this wasn't bigger news because it was pretty shocking to me when I learned about it. But we learned through the statements of claim in court that this woman had tried to join ISIS. So she considered herself an ISIS member from 2014 on. In 2016, she said that she traveled to Turkey. So she flew from Toronto to Istanbul. From Istanbul, she managed to trek her way across Turkey and went the same path that all the Western terrorists that joined ISIS took, tried to cross into Syria at that Turkey-Syria border. And it was there that she was intercepted and stopped by Turkish authorities who had been working on a tip, apparently from her own brother, who said that she was there trying to join ISIS. And so they detained this woman and sent her back to Canada. Okay, so they sent her back to Canada. That's a crime, by the way. Leaving Canada for the purpose of carrying out a terrorist attack or joining a terrorist group is it's a felony. It's in federal law, and the sentence for that can be up to life imprisonment. And yet, for some reason, this woman was, according to the RCMP, she was interviewed by the RCMP, but no charges were laid, and the file was closed. So for some reason, even though this woman is like an outward supporter of ISIS, she's a loud, enthusiastic ISIS supporter, the RCMP did nothing. The RCMP just interviewed her, determined that she wasn't a threat or that it wasn't a big deal that she had just tried to join ISIS, and so they let her go. A year later, she's in a Canadian Tire carrying out her own version of an ISIS-inspired attack. Yeah, it was a pretty low-tech, low-grade attack that didn't lead to anything damaging, but she still had the intent. She still had the ideology. And for some reason, the RCMP just didn't take her seriously. It's unfathomable to me how the RCMP can just know of a person who traveled to try to join ISIS, was stopped, and then they just let her go, basically. They questioned her, they closed the file, and they said that the case was closed. Well, no, I mean, this woman clearly hates everything about Canada, hates the West, still wanted to go on a rampage to kill Canadians. She's unrepentant, unremorseful. In court, she said that the reason she was doing this was because of ISIS. When you kill Muslims, you pay for it, she said. She did it for revenge, to stop killing Muslims in Syria and Iraq. You're killing ISIS. I'm from ISIS, she said. She said she was disappointed that she didn't hurt more people. that she hoped to be a martyr. I mean, you read the details of this case, and you can see that she really, really is unrepentant and a hardcore ideological ISIS member. So that's disappointing that the RCMP didn't handle that. I've got a column coming out in the Toronto Sun on this case. It's going to be out later this afternoon. I'll post it. But I go into all the details and everything there. Let's move on. I think we're on the fourth one now. The fourth one just came out today. This was breaking news earlier this morning. There was a Canadian who was identified as a suspect in a Kenya hotel attack. So Al-Shabaab, which is a terrorist group based out of Somalia. Al-Shabaab means the youth, and they're kind of an Al-Qaeda affiliate. And so they're known for carrying out terrorist attacks in that region, and specifically against civilians in Kenya. Well, earlier this week, a group of 5 or 6 terrorists attacked a hotel complex in Nairobi, Kenya. 5 of them were gunmen, and they went in. Basically, they had a bunch of bombs set up in the hotel. The bombs went off, and then as the people were fleeing the hotel because there were bombs going off, there were 5 terrorists there shooting people. So they managed to kill 22 people. The 4 of the gunmen were killed. There was also a suicide bomber. He blew himself up. He was killed, and Al-Shabaab, this Somali terrorist group, has taken responsibility. Now, the news that came out today is that the local police in Kenya have arrested 5 individuals who are considered to be co-conspirators, or who are alleged of being co-conspirators. And one of those individuals has been identified as a Canadian citizen, a guy named Giled Abdihakam. And we don't know anything about this guy. We know nothing about him other than that for some reason he has a Canadian passport. For some reason this guy has a Canadian passport. Who knows why? So we don't know anything about him. We don't know where he was born, when he became Canadian. We don't know whether he's ever lived in Canada. We just know that he is Canadian. He's been arrested. He hasn't been proven of anything in court at this point. He's just alleged. At this point, he's being held by police and authorities in Nairobi. And he's alleged to be part of him. Trying to load a video from Natasha Fatah over at CBC.
When the information was breaking, they have taken 5 people into custody, and one of them is a Canadian national who they are alleging is a co-conspirator.
All right, well, it's basically just repeated the information I gave. This isn't loading properly right now, but you can find Natasha has been breaking it all down, and it's all the information's on her Twitter page. That's not going to load either. That's okay. That's not going to load. Anyway, what she's going through in this report is that
earlier this week at a hotel complex. So these 5.
No, it's not going to work. All right, let's not try. She's breaking it down, basically saying that they have information that there's a group of co-conspirators, that people out of Somalia were planning this attack, and that it's basically an international incident because the attackers were based out of Somalia, and they launched this attack in Kenya. This isn't the first time that Al-Shabaab has targeted civilians in Kenya. There was a huge attack back in 2013 against a mall. Same kind of idea. Terrorists went through a mall, kind of like a modern Western mall in Nairobi, Kenya, shooting people. I think about 130 people were killed in that attack. And then they also had an attack against a university, and it's pretty horrific stuff. But the university attack, oh, here it is. Sorry, the mall attack, they killed 67 people. The university attack in 2015, 167 people were killed. So this is still a breaking story that's unfolding. A lot of the details are unknown at this point, but the Canadian man is accused of aiding and abetting the Al-Shabaab terrorists. So pretty horrific story there. And then finally, let's do the 5th one here. This is a story closer to home. We learned new information this week about the Danforth shooter. Remember him? Last summer, he carried out, Faisal Hussein's his name, and he carried out deadly attack in, there's a picture someone had on their Instagram here of the attacker, gunmen walking calmly down the Danforth Avenue in Toronto, the Greek town, as it's known, which is like a lively residential area with lots of restaurants and bars. It was a warm Sunday evening, and this terrorist just basically started shooting up restaurants, shooting up cafes. He shot a little girl in an ice cream parlor. He killed two people, a 10-year-old and an 18-year-old. And interestingly, I've talked about this a lot before, but interestingly, when this attack happened, there was this weird response by both the media, the police, and politicians that they didn't want to acknowledge like any of the basic facts of this case. They quickly had a statement that came out saying this guy was suffering from some kind of a mental illness, an undefined mental illness, and that he was kind of like not to blame. It wasn't his fault. And that was sort of the storyline. Anyone who talked about ties to terrorism, talked about his personal background, which included, I mean, he came from an Afghan family living in sort of low-income area of Toronto. His family had lots of connections to gangs. He had traveled himself to Pakistan. There were police reports saying that he had been known to police. They were looking into his website history, which included ISIS websites. Anyway, no one wanted to talk about the terrorism or national security connections. Everyone wanted to emphasize the mental health connections. Well, there's a new report that came out this week. Police finally let more information be known. They released a previously unredacted search warrant that they had, so we got to know what they found in the killer's apartment when it was searched in his bedroom. And so what we found, I think that the three big takeaway of what we found were that the guy had a stockpile of weapons. He was clearly a huge gun enthusiast. He had AK-47s. He had a bunch of other weapons, all found in his room. Second, he was very political. The idea that he was sort of just a mentally ill boy that wasn't really political at all was disproven because he had a large collection of DVDs. He was a conspiracy theorist. He was really into 9/11 conspiracies, conspiracies about the Iraq War. He obviously had political views and political opinions, and I think that that's relevant. And then third, the police found receipts for $9,000 in cash payments to a Pakistani nonprofit in order to give something called a mosque fund and membership fees. So the whole idea that this wasn't a terrorist attack rested on the idea that he wasn't religious and that he wasn't political. Well, the information from the Toronto police proved that he was both political and religious, and I think that helps us understand his motives, right? Mental illness is not a motive. Mental illness doesn't cause you to get a bunch of guns and go shoot up little girls in the Danforth in Toronto. That might be part of the equation, that he was, mentally ill. I'm sure a lot of these terrorists are mentally ill. You kind of have to be mentally ill to go and randomly start killing a bunch of people, be it for your religious convictions or for other reasons. So, I don't doubt the guy wasn't crazy. But the idea that we can't talk about his connections to terrorism, we can't call us terrorism is nonsense, especially given that ISIS claimed responsibility. So that is the fifth Canadian with a nexus, Canadian person with a nexus to Canada who was in the news this week for terrorism. And then I said I would do a bonus story as well, because, this is a crazy week. How often do you have 5 news stories in 1 week about Canadians involved in terrorism? Well, this other one is just as concerning. You might have seen this story. Person considered national security concern gets permanent residency in error. And there's Canada's Public Safety Minister, Ralph Goodale, who had no good explanation to how this happened. So permanent residency is like a Canadian version of a green card. It means that you get to stay and live in Canada. So for some reason, not only was this person let into the country, like he was admitted at a border somewhere, but he was also approved and given permanent residency despite a known national security concern by Canadian officials. The story is super vague. We don't learn anything about this guy. We don't learn who he was, when he entered Canada. We don't know if he was an asylum seeker, an illegal migrant, a refugee claimant, or whether he was just sort of a person who came to work in Canada. We have no idea. We don't know any information about him. Basically, all it said was that there was a series of failures that led to this unnamed person being granted permanent residency. And the reason that it was reported is because a 2018 briefing note to the minister was leaked to CTV News. Oh, sorry, not leaked. It was given to CTV through access information. So somehow CTV got a tip and filed an access information and got this story. No information. We don't even know if this guy's still in Canada. It doesn't say. It doesn't say whether he was, whether after they found out about it, they rectified it and kicked him out of the country. Doesn't say. So we have no idea. All we know is that basically our system doesn't work the way it should if we're having people who have no national security concerns given permanent residency. And again, no details. All they say is that they can't comment. The government can't comment on these kinds of personal matters. And so, that's it. We have no idea, but it's pretty pathetic. I mean, the idea that we have, at least 60 known terrorists walking around in Canada, walking free. There's stories almost every day in the news about individuals who are somehow Canadian, who are involved in terrorist groups, either ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Al-Shabaab, or just sort of, their own kind of lone wolf attacks, or just, ideological jihadists, like the individual who wanted to kill the Danish cartoonist. Why are these individuals? These are the kind of individuals who should never become Canadian in the first place. If we had proper screening, proper vetting, even the idea of when people come to Canada, they should adopt Canadian values. We should be asking about their worldview and their ideology when they come to Canada. We shouldn't be letting people become Canadian who believe in imposing blasphemy laws, believe that they should be killing journalists over not liking the cartoons that they make. It just shows major problems all the way through. And then this story is kind of the icing on the cake, that we can't even stop people who we know are national security threats to our country from getting inside. It's totally disgraceful, totally ridiculous. So all those stories, all 6 of those stories we've written about for True North, so you can read them more in depth. Check out our new website again. It is tnc.news. You can also find us at truenorthcanada.com or .ca. We have both of them. We've got a bunch more changes that are coming. New products, new people, new personalities, lots of reports, lots of journalists. So really excited. Keep an eye on the changes that are happening at True North. And I will leave it at that. I hope everyone has a great weekend, and we will talk to you again next week. All right, take care, guys.